follow-up session. Nothing Moves Without Us, a Black Culture podcast. Just doing a quick recap of In the Heat of the Night film, the 1967 film starring Sidney Poitier. Uh,
Poitier.
I feel like we had a very rich conversation. I feel like there are a lot of things we could have just kept going on, but for time's sake, we had to cut off. So I think this gives us a good
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to jump back into a few conversations and topics.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have anything you want to start with? You're smiling, so I'm assuming you have something nice to start with. Do you have anything to start
Oh,
with?
I was just talking to you about like hanging out with a cute little baby all day. So that was
That's where the smile
incredible.
came from. Okay.
Yeah, I was like just thinking, I was like, oh, babies.
Anything for the like after re-listening to the episode?
Um, I really liked our conversation on like how integrity is subjective. Because we talked about that a lot about how like integrity means different things to different people. Um, so that's definitely like my favorite part of the podcast, that like, well, at least that episode, like getting into that conversation on how it differs depending on who you are, pretty much, because not everyone looks at things like the same way.
Right.
So that, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what it all kind of boils down to for all our lives, right? Like, what are you
Right.
willing to compromise? What are you willing to tough it out for? And this kind of ties into like the first thing I wanted to talk about was going back to like social responsibility. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I, personally, I feel that we all have individual responsibilities and social responsibilities to like whatever groups we believe in, support, and champion. Um, and I guess the question is, at what point do you step back from supporting like the group you value and care about? Like, is there a moment where you're like, you know what, I don't have any more hope, or there's no point in supporting. I'm just gonna back off. Like, do you feel that exists for you at all? Or what groups do you represent, or what plan want to represent, or believe in representing?
Black people, black women, um, women, um, but like generally, I don't think stepping back from uh an entire group that I belong to is ever the real answer or the right answer. Um, but it's just like certain people won't understand it. Like if you have to, like, I don't know, it feels like when you get to the point where you're trying to convince somebody to understand where you're coming from, where you're kind of like begging them to see your humanity, then that's when I have to like step away regardless.
Right.
But not like never generally will I ever be like, oh, I'm done with like black women or black people or anything like that of that nature. But if I'm somebody that's trying to get my point across and you like refuse to see where I'm coming from because you would rather feel or be right, than learn or understand or express any sort of like sympathy, empathy, then that's when I'll be like, this conversation is over. Like, but I think it's all about like not even compromise. It's just kind of being able to have perspective. I feel like
Right.
a lot of people sometimes would rather not have perspective because then it makes them question everything that they've learned, um, everything that they believe in. And once that happens, then you got to do a lot of soul searching. I feel like you're constantly learning, and if you're not, then you're stagnant.
Right.
So that's just how I feel usually about most things.
Right. Um, I definitely I've kind of been talking about that on my TikTok. Just like
Mhm.
perspective and realizing that so much of social media, the engagement now is really just people who maybe it's always been like this, or maybe I'm just realizing it because I'm now it's happening to me finally because I'm like creating content more actively. That most
Mhm.
of it is just people who have a rebuttal to rebuttal, but don't have any value or additional content to add on to it. Like I did a post yesterday. So on TikTok, someone did a video saying that like our ancestors never had access to like mental health counseling. You're and it's not that something was wrong with them. You're just weak, right? You're just weak because you need mental health counseling to kind of get by. And someone stitched it and replied saying that um, they didn't have access. I'm butchering this. Jesus Christ. The initial point was that some sisters didn't need like mental health counseling, right? You're just weak. And the reply was that they didn't have access to it. So I did a video saying, what would a mental health counselor like really say to a
So-
slave about being enslaved? Like how would that help or like change my life situation? Someone commented that they wrote it's for life experience. Your argument doesn't make sense. Just like very basic, your argument doesn't make sense and you're taking it out of context. And like I did a quick reply, like what does it mean? Like I talked for 3 minutes. Like which it are you
Mhm.
referring to? But
Yeah.
also like like again, answering the question, right? Like I start with like questions, like what is the solution for this, right? And no people don't have solutions. They just have rebuttals saying that you're wrong. And it
Right.
kind of feels like that ties in with the idea of people who just aren't looking right. They're not looking for growth. Gillespie, like you said, was the only one who showed like some moderate level of growth. And going back to what you said, humanity. Um,
Mhm.
and this, like I really like what you said. At some point, you just give up. Once you realize it's a failed effort, right? Like everyone
Right.
isn't going to wake up, and the goal should be focusing time on like effort and action and working with people who are willing to step out of their comfort zone a little bit. But the challenge is that it feels like
Right.
that's just a minority, right? It feels like
Mhm.
and going to like even being prejudiced, right? Like I know I had interaction with this type of person last time. It didn't go too well, so I'm good this time. But
Yeah.
perseverance and integrity, right? We gotta move past it. We gotta move past it.
Yeah. But just going back to what you said, someone was saying that slaves didn't need mental health care. Is that?
I lost it. It was one of those moments where like I had the video, I closed my phone for a second, then I went back and it was gone.
And it was
But I think
gone.
the general idea of like the first video was like you don't have the mental fortitude to get through what life is pushing you through. Like your ancestors didn't
Mhm.
didn't need didn't need mental health. They just kind of worked with what they had. And then his the end of his video was follow me to be a man, right? Like man up, be a man. You don't need mental health. And the black guy who replied, he was saying that they didn't have access to mental health. Yeah. So I was like,
I mean,
I don't yeah.
it's just a weird conversation to have because what is going on? Because I mean, like, why would that be a service? Why would it be like, hey, are you a slave? Are you feeling depressed? Come talk to this therapist. That's not ever going to be a conversation that is had. But
Right.
also the fact that someone could say, hey, this thing that was not even popular with your ancestors or ever going to be provided for your ancestors or anyone for that matter, we don't need it. Like, what do you mean? Like, that's totally up to you. But the fact that anyone could put the words like slaves and mental health together and be like, we that's what we needed. No, we didn't need that specifically. I think we needed freedom first and foremost. But
And
okay.
I mean, I'm sure I kind of went left with it. And
Hmm.
maybe I added more sauce to it, but it was just there for the picking. I think that was it for me. It was there for the picking.
Right.
Um, yeah, yeah,
I mean, sometimes people just talk to talk.
yeah,
Sometimes it doesn't
yeah.
even have to make sense. It's just I'm gonna take two things, I'm gonna put those two things together, I'm gonna put it out there for other people to absorb, and maybe like someone will agree with me, and then I'll feel, justified in why I said what I said. That is so silly. That is
And
so silly.
I'm glad you said that because the person reply under my video was that what I'm saying doesn't make sense, and that's like the other side of it, right? Like to
Right.
them, I'm just this person who put these two random ideas together to present an argument, and it doesn't make sense. And
Right.
I did a follow up video saying that just because it doesn't make sense to you doesn't mean it doesn't make sense in entirety. And leading with questions instead of coming at things matter of fact is like part of the demise of communication, right? Like
Right.
if I present, like, we do this podcast for an hour, we're here for an hour, half hour. If someone just makes a comment, I don't agree with your points. Like, okay, like which one, which number one,
Right.
which points, right? And what's your counter argument, right? Like, what do
Right.
you
Why?
really? Yeah, like, yeah, basically why. Like that's it, right? The why.
Yeah.
And we don't offer that anymore socially, right?
I
And like,
mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no,
I
no,
just
no,
mean
no, no.
it's a hard thing to do on social media because off the bat you can't pick up tone. Everybody's so combative. I think it's easier to have those conversations in person. But again, it also relies on the person you're trying to get the point across. Like I remember having a
Right,
conversation about um mater- black mothers specifically having a high mortality rate when giving birth because their pain is not taken as seriously, just a lot of those issues. And then having someone say, "Well, I didn't hear that. Where'd you hear that? I've never heard anything about that." And it's like, I didn't make this up. If you need a resource, I can give it to you. But now that you have the resource, what are you going to do with that information? You're
right.
just going to refuse to believe it anyway because you've already got an idea in your head that this doesn't happen to black women more than anyone else. So I'm just being a victim.
Right, right,
So
right, right.
if someone's not willing to have a conversation, it's like conversation is very different from an argument. Some people just want to argue. Some people want to converse. They want to have a discussion. Some people just want to get their point across, leave it in the air because they think they're smart. And it's just you're saying things with there's no material to it. There's no, there's nothing. It's just an empty argument. I don't know. People are
Yeah, it's like I said, I'm really glad we did this movie in the heat
hmm
of the night, because it's very telling. Like everything you said just now, it's like all of that was going on in the movie, and
right.
it's so I always wonder, like, where's the social growth in like certain aspects? Like where's the social growth in terms of communication,
hmm
in terms of being open, like going back to integrity, like you said, right? Look what Virgil Tibbs had to get go through just to get a inch of have a good day, right? Like we talked about,
Right.
he didn't get a thank you. He just gotta have a good day. Like that was the height
Right.
of complimenting a black person.
Yeah, exactly. Because they could be two people, and it's just that two people with the same job, um, who both aren't getting any kind of respect in that sense. But Gillespie refused to relate to Tibbs because he was black. He's like, we can't have the same problems. Like I'm white and you're black. Like we're relating too much. It was like almost this fear of realizing that why do we relate to each other so much? And it's like, oh, you guys,
You hit on a good point. Yeah, like
it's just silly. It's like I'm not going to relate to you because you're too different. Forget it. Forget I said anything.
maybe even worse, right? He's like, I think you've kind of said this in the podcast episode, right? Like maybe Tibbs is like, I'm my life is just as bad as a black person. Like what am I doing out here?
He's jealous. It's definitely that too. Like it's a jealousy thing. It's like I can't believe that and also like look at the dynamic at what Tibbs had to do. He had to be he was in a suit, he was well spoken, he was attentive, he had to be super smart. And then you have Gillespie on the other hand who is accusing every single person of a crime. He's a bit sloppy, he's annoying, he's not well spoken, he's a
What do you
jerk,
call him? A hick?
he's a hick. He's like a hick, and they're both cops, but at the end of the day, Gillespie's always going to get a little bit more respect than Tibbs because of who he is, because he's a white man. So
Right.
it's that thing from what is that show? Scandal, where the dad tells the scandal
I've never
lady.
watched it. I mean, I've watched a few
I
episodes,
never
but
watched
I
it.
wouldn't know.
I've
Okay.
never watched it either, but there's a clip that's always it goes viral every once in a while where the character from Scandal, her father tells her, you know that everything you do, you have to work twice as hard because you're black and because you're this. And she's got it in her head like, yeah, that's absolutely that's it. Like
Right.
that's why she has to be the person that she is. And then you see that in every aspect of everything in life. And then this movie is just a prime example. This man is he's he's got to be college educated. He's the number one murder detective in Chicago, and
Philly,
he's
Philly.
like going in Philadelphia, sorry, and he's going toe to toe with this like dumb cop who's not good at his job. And at the end of the day, he still can't really get even a thank you, nothing. They just want him out. They're like, you solved it, you left. Here's your stupid suitcase. Get the hell out of here. Like, that's so rude and racist.
He said, "It's your stupid suitcase and get the hell out of here." I love that. Uh, what you said made me think about. This is like an old. I heard this from like Patrice O'Neill. Eternal blessings to Patrice O'Neill. He was saying, you look at positions of power, right, and who gets in race wise, and this kind of ties in with what my
Hmm.
next question is. Obama had to be Barack Obama had to be the most superior, the height of blackness to become president, right?
Right.
Trump was like the lows of whiteness, and he became president. You look at Arnold Schwarzenegger being like governor of California for what? Like what experience? Ross Perot for what? What experience?
Ronald
Like you look,
Reagan.
yeah. I said Ross Perot. I meant Ronald Reagan. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you. You look at this. It's the mediocrity, right? Like whiteness is allowed to have this mediocrity, and just off rip, its existence is enough. And to excel in any form of blackness, and to like really get the height of white acceptance, you have to be the top tier of it all. So my
Right.
question was, and this kind of ties into something we said initially when we were talking about it. I said I viewed everything as white and black, but for you, you just kind of viewed it as like racial and racism. You didn't. I feel like you didn't make it like binary. So
Mhm.
does race matter to you when it comes to racism? Does the binary aspect matter, or is it just the act of racism within itself? Is that your main focus?
I don't think I understand the question. What do you
Oh,
mean?
all right. So when we started off the episode, I said that every time I watch Bush Jr. Thank you, Chico. I totally forgot. Oh my gosh! Like really thinking about respectfully the buffoonery, right? And like,
Yeah.
um, so in the beginning of the episode, I was saying that I watched everything as black and white. Like I viewed it as white racism. I
Hmm.
viewed it blatantly as white racism. And yeah, your response was along the lines of you only view it as racism in general. You didn't view it within the scope of whiteness. So my
Hmm.
question's kind of tied around that, and maybe I misunderstood you. Is that kind of
Um,
clarify?
I think when I said that, I meant pretty much that there's no difference between whiteness and racism, in the sense that
Damn.
when it
Okay,
comes to
that's heavy.
whiteness, yeah, but like when it comes to literally everything systemic, like what this country is built on, so that means whatever this country is built on, every aspect of this country was also built on it. The police force, if it's entertainment, if it's news, if it's politics, everything is connected to race in itself. And when people talk about white supremacy, it doesn't necessarily mean like you have to be somebody that says like, oh yeah, I think um, black people are this. It doesn't have to be said because it's already ingrained in the system. um,
Right,
so I don't disconnect the two. When it comes to whiteness and racism, they're linked because they're socially linked,
right,
um, to what America is. So every aspect of America that exists, I feel like you have to question it. You have to question the motive of it. You have to question why it was, shot a certain way, or why things happen a certain way. Like it always, racism will always play a huge, if not, like a huge part in everything that happens in this country.
right.
So I don't separate the two because they are the same, but
Got
not
it.
in a way where I'm just like, all white people are evil or anything of that nature. But those things are like linked, and they've never been unlinked. They've always been hand in hand. Like they've always been the same to me.
Got it. That makes sense. Like I talked earlier about I add sauce to it just to like clarify, but for you it's just like
Hmm.
innate and understood off rip, like they're one and the
Yeah,
same. I definitely get that. I definitely get that. Yeah.
yeah,
The
definitely
only
too
addition,
woke, you know.
the only additional thing I had was you made this dope comment about Mama Kaliba,
Hmm.
and one of her quotes along the lines was saying that working with white people destroys your soul. And a lot of like my perspective nowadays is thinking about like white assimilation. I think I've said it before in this podcast. The height of the black experience in the U.S. ends up being accepted and partaking in whiteness. And I
Hmm.
was thinking about the idea of soul, and soul in terms of like culture, soul in terms of identity, and how the gradual assimilation, gradual acceptance, it destroys culture. I just did a video on TikTok talking about being a first generation American, as a Haitian American. I feel like I have a responsibility to honor some of my Haitian tradition, take on African American tradition, like represent that within blackness. But
Hmm.
and I know that if I don't, then it dies with me. My children aren't going to do it because I don't do it. My mother will pass
Hmm.
away at some time, so they missed that link. Um, so I guess wondering, like, as African American, how do you feel about uh, the cult? I guess the culture of the Black experience. So, like, what does the culture of the Black experience feel like for you? Like over these past few years, past decades, like the transition of it. What does that feel like for you in terms of soul? Do
Well,
you feel like it's still there? Do you feel like it's still a struggle?
I definitely think that it's there, and I feel like a lot of people outside of being like a Black American sometimes don't understand how influential African American culture has been on American culture in general, because African Americans are stolen from so much. Like everything that we create as Black people is somehow, commodified or corporatized or whatever. So, like a lot of people say, like Black people are the blueprint.
Right,
Um, the music, the culture, everything about it that's like rich, it comes it comes from that. It comes from that struggle. Um, I think it's more accepted now because Black people always, I feel they're so giving.
right,
Like like we get like look how excited we get when like white people get involved in Black things. It's like, oh, Jack Harlow, what? I love Jack Harlow. Eminem, oh, Eminem, I love Eminem. um Even there was a sign language interpreter at the Make the Stallion, one of Make the Stallion's concert, and she was a white woman, and she was like, signing and everything, and she was doing a great job, and everyone was like, yeah, that's right, girl. But it was because she was white, and it almost like they were like more so impressed because she was a white person doing this.
right.
And it's just kind of like silly to me, because we should be praising Black people for doing it too. So yeah, Chico said they're invited to the cookout. You hear people say that whenever they see like a white person doing something like fun or cool. But we're definitely the blueprint for a lot of things. Like even like for example, this new Elvis biopic came out, and they got Doja Cat to do one of the songs on it, and she doesn't even sample Elvis. She does like a sample of Hound Dog, but it's like Mama Thornton's version of it, because it's like that's where that started from, and
Right,
then
right,
it came his later down the line. But I feel like a lot of the times not we, but like Americans in general don't realize how much of what they love came from Black people first. Like like trendsetters. Um, and I think a lot of the time people just want that credit. They even say it with TikTok creators, up and coming TikTok creators that start like these young Black girls, these young Black ladies starting dance trends, and
right.
um, then all of a sudden white people pick it up, and then these white girls, these white ladies go on Jimmy Fallon, and they do the same dance, and they're getting paid, and they're getting sponsorships, but those sponsorships are not being offered to these Black girls. And it's just like, why not? And that's how it's like it always plays into like why not? Because
Right.
apparently our culture is really popular, but not if we're doing it. If someone else is doing it, then it's great, but if it's us, then it's you just par for the course. Like that's what you guys do, but this white lady did it, and that's even cooler. And it's like, is it though?
Right.
So I mean, I think it definitely we're just I don't know, we've just in general, just black people have always been trendsetters wherever they dropped us, whether it be in DR, Puerto Rico, whether it be in Brazil, wherever. Like it's always very evident how much of an influence black people have had on not even just American culture, but cultures around the
Global.
world,
Yeah.
globally, globally.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything you said. Hip hop is the defining global culture, like in all aspects, fashion, music, like social norms, social rights to an extent nowadays.
Yeah.
But it like on one end, you brought up like the business aspect. It traditionally, I've heard that blackness doesn't capitalize off of capitalism. Um, and like I get that on one level. Like we talked about soul, we talked about art. Like sometimes you just create the dance, you create the art just for the fun of it, and
Hmm.
you don't perceive that it's gonna become something, right? So you don't copyright it, you don't trademark it, you don't do all the business aspects that solidify as yours, right? Because you do it for the culture, right? Like we say, you do it for the culture. You do it for the culture, you give it away for free, and
Hmm.
the culture vulture aspect, right, of capitalism and whiteness is
Hmm.
I'm gonna make some money off of this. I'm gonna make some money off this
Yeah.
nigga somehow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that something else I was thinking about asking you. Like, I feel like there's always this ever present tension between. Are you familiar with like FBA and ADOS?
ADOS sounds familiar.
Yeah. So FBA is Foundational Black Americans, and ADOS is African Descendants of Slaves. And they're
Hmm.
rooted in like the African American experience.
Hmm.
And there's kind of this divide, and it's always been present. Divide between like West Indians, different um, I guess immigrants or first generation Americans from like different African
Hmm.
continents, and the African American experience itself. And I was earlier today I was thinking about like you think when you think about black neighborhoods, right? You think about a neighborhood like Harlem, Flatbush, Crown Heights. There are all these unique different pockets of blackness that kind of live
Hmm.
together and cohabitat and share the same space. Um, and then on one side of the spectrum is like the violence, right? If the negativity that it feels is always going on. And I was kind of comparing it to a neighborhood like South Side, Brooklyn, like Williamsburg, where like a lot of Puerto Ricans live, the Heights, where it doesn't feel like there's so much tension there, right? There's like this acceptance of community, maybe because everyone's the same. And I'm trying to understand I'm always long winded. I'm trying to understand, how do we break free from that innate tension within the black experience, right? Like if the black experience, different cultures than blackness can't unify and let's be cool off rip, like how do we expect it to work with other races?
Um, I don't know. I feel like sometimes when people like I think we talked about this before, when people feel like they've done a little bit better, they kind of distance themselves from the culture. They still want to maybe make money from it, still enjoy it, but like distance themselves from it. I feel like with um like immigrant populations a lot of the time, like Dominicans and Puerto Ricans, because you mentioned that, like they stick together because that's it's super beneficial. I feel like we've been here, well, African Americans have been here for so long, and they've like there's just so many systems in place that tries to keep us divided. It's like, oh, like I said, respectability politics, and also the fact that
Colorism.
usually colorism, even throwing in texturism, misogyny in the black community too. All those things like play a big part. And I also feel like we've been here such a long time and we all don't have the same exact goals um, when it comes to things like that, because we get grouped in, like you said, oh, the black community. Like, oh, this person speaks for the black community. Like, you can't say that because we don't all have the same goals. Some people's
Right.
goals are to, if they work a white blue collar job, is to be in a union and be able to take care of their families. And if it's they're middle class, then you have middle class problems. If you're richer, you have those problems too. So I think sometimes those classes um, become more important than race in that sense. Um, but I also think, like, I don't know. It's just like a very low. It's like a very heavy and loaded question because um, how hard is it to, like, care a lot about becoming community if you have so many other problems to deal with?
Right.
You've got racism, you've got bills, you've got trying to keep your family safe, trying to just survive. So I feel like in that sense it's a little bit harder too. But it's definitely like, I don't know. I honestly really don't know. It's just, I mean, I don't know. What did Chico say? It's been ingrained in us since slavery to not have unity. We need to break the cycle, but we're not given the tools. And that's another thing. Um, he's right. Because think of what is it? The small Seneca village, I think it is called, in Central Park, where, like, literally there was a village and black people were living there, and they had their, a community, and there were stores and houses and everything. And what happened once they became sufficient, became self-sufficient within that community? It was destroyed. They're like, oh, actually, we are going to get rid of this, and now it's Central Park.
Right.
You see it happen in, yeah, it happened in, it happens in other places too, where these towns becomes, is it Rosewood, I'm thinking? Is it
Yeah,
Rosewood?
I think it is Rosewood, Black
Yeah,
Wall Street, Oklahoma. Yeah.
yeah, like this thing happens where they said, if you want this, then get it for yourself. And then it's like, okay, fine, then we'll get it for ourselves. And then it happens, it becomes self-sufficient, and then what happens? It's destroyed. Think about Gullah Island, same thing. What's happening? Gentrification there, destroying it. And now, how are you supposed to have a sense of community if you constantly have Tulsa? My Kiana says Tulsa. These places exist where they become self-sufficient, they thrive, and then white people don't like it, and then what happens? It gets destroyed. So if that keeps happening, how are you supposed to have community um, if it keeps getting destroyed? Like, even thinking about Harlem, all the great things that were happening in Harlem, as far as like them doing but night bazaars. And I even remember as a kid riding the bus and seeing people protest gentrification. And now all these new things pop up in Harlem. Like, we have a whole, like, Harlem has a Whole Foods. Harlem is going to have a Trader Joe's. There's a New York Sports Club. There's a Starbucks. And those things weren't there before. And now they're there, but they're not for us. And
Right.
it's hard to, you know, be able to have a sense of community when we don't even own anything in our communities, you know? Like, we don't own anything. And it's not because we're too lazy to own anything. It's already belonged to somebody else for who knows how long. Then there's generational wealth, you know? The same opportunities that immigrants have when they come here are not always afforded to Black Americans either.
Very
Um,
true.
is, yeah, like, think about Wells Fargo, when you found out people Wells Fargo was doing to black people specifically, not giving them loans or giving them higher interest rates if they did get loans, or how hard it is for black people to sell their homes if they have pictures of black families inside the homes and no one wants to buy it. And it's just like, it's so systemic. and
Right.
and I feel like it's also one of those things where it's like, well, if my parents came here 2 generations ago and now we own a home and we're working, you didn't have to deal with the same kind of discrimination and racism that Black Americans did to get there. There's already so many stereotypes about us that we're lazy. Lazy? We've been working for free for hundreds of years.
Right.
We built this country, but we're lazy. You know what I'm saying? Like, even when you talk about Juneteenth, 1865, June 19th, 1865, people finding out that they have been free for probably 2 years and they had no idea and no one was going to tell them. Like, we don't have generational wealth because we weren't allowed to have generational wealth. It's like people don't realize how much of a big part uh, generational wealth plays in being able to do what you want to do down the line. If my mom had given me a house, I can go out and explore jobs that I never thought to explore because I don't have to worry about housing. But I have
Right.
to worry about housing and renting, and it's just like it's super layered, you know. So that's what I mean to it. It comes back to the whiteness going hand in hand with the racism because it's just built into the system. Like, none of this is unintentional. It's very intentional, you know.
Right. So I'm going to put the excuse me, the invite link in the chat in case Chico Fontaine or Kiana want to jump in. You said a lot. You said a lot.
Sorry, I was talking. I
No,
was
no,
like,
no, no, no. I never mean that in a bad way. I mean that like, yo, you was talking some real, right? Because on one
hmm
level, like, earlier you talked about like classism. I think there's an innate arrogance in immigrants, especially from like black communities who come in and Chico, I'll let you in a second. Who come in here and they think they're innately better off, right, than black Americans, African Americans, right? Number one, I made it to America, right? So now I have all these luxuries, like you said, immigrants have. Like, my mother came from Haiti in like the 70s, and Haitians had a network, right? Like back when all those immigrants were coming during the 60s, 70s, they had a network and they utilized each other to profit off of what America provides. So there's a
right,
innate disdain, like, well, I got here and I did all of this. Why can't you do it? But then they fail to realize that there were additional incentives for them coming here.
right.
Um, I wanted to ask Chico. He says that we're not given the tools, and I want to challenge the idea of not being given the tools because we live in a modern age where we have infinite knowledge and not, yeah, I mean, relatively we have infinite knowledge and resources. So I want to challenge the idea of not being given the tools to thrive and find unity. You're coming in low.
You're muted, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
That's
So when
good.
I say that not given the tools, it it goes back to what you're saying about how immigrants come here, um not just Caribbean immigrants, but like, Asian immigrants, East Asia, India immigrants come here and, they're they're literally given more opportunities. Like, even when it comes down to something as simple as like welfare, and government assistance programs, it's easier to get that stuff when you come here as a new immigrant as opposed to being an existing Black American here. Um, my mom was a nurse, and and she grew up in the '60s and '70s.
Are you African
And
American also? I just want to context this.
yeah, like my family is, we've been in New York since the 1800s.
Cool.
So like we're New Yorkers. Um, and she was a nurse, so she worked with a lot of immigrants, and so she saw it firsthand. Um, Being a single mom of four kids, I was the fourth. There was a big gap between me and my siblings, though. So she saw how hard it was, like firsthand, to like I said, even get something as simple as welfare, or like, when you're a Black American, it's like it's extra hoops for you to jump through. And while yes, we currently live in a technological age, information is everywhere. Um, but even when you obtain that information, it goes back to things like with the Wells Fargo thing. Yeah, you can get a loan, but your rates are going to be higher. It's going to just be harder for you to even get your foot in the door to get the loan. I've attempted to start businesses and, bulletproof business plans, all of that. And it's like, oh, but you don't have collateral, or you don't have this, or you don't have that. So, we can't give you a loan. And this goes back to the generational wealth. Now, you know, um, be it an immigrant that's been here, for like first generation or second generation, or a non person of color that oh, my dad has a house, my dad has a business, I can use that as collateral, I can use that as a backing for my loan. So it's, while the stuff is obtainable and the information is out there, it's still very unobtainable because we're not given the tools. When I say tools, I mean things like generational wealth and opportunity, just to, like, sign up for public programs. They literally, especially in the last, I would say the last 20 years, especially, I've noticed, they put more programs in place where, it's designed to help, but it doesn't really fully help, because then, you know, you have things like affirmative action, and it's like, oh, they're an affirmative act. So now when you use the tools that are given to you, you're still looked down upon. But yet other people can use these same tools. White people can go to HBCUs, and it's an affirmative action, thing, because they're the minority at this school. So it's like, we're given the tools, but the tools aren't always accepted, and they're not always obtainable, just because of how things are set up.
Yeah, and then even to bring that up too. So I went to a college preparatory high school, right? There weren't in Harlem, and it's not like there was a ton of them. There was that one specific school where literally as I got into junior high school, they were preparing me for college from 7th grade until I was in
Yeah,
12th grade. I didn't that was just that school though. Like I don't think that was the
I
same
think
thing for other high schools where they were literally preparing for college off the jump. We had students come from Columbia to teach us how to prepare for the SATs. We had college admissions essay classes. We had a bunch of different after school programs like building with books to do like nonprofit stuff to pad our resumes. And I don't think those same opportunities were given to kids at other high schools,
I
and
think
that can
the
cause
only
like a lot
other
of resentment too.
the only other school I can think of in Harlem that was like actively college prep in regards to high schools was is a Philip Randolph.
Yeah, and
And
maybe Thurgood Marshall Academy.
yeah, and a Philip Randolph benefited from basically being on the city college campus. So,
Right.
they had, we had college classes and things like that, and programs where we can go and take classes at city. Um, but yeah, that's a great point, that it wasn't, I didn't even take, I had no SAT prep classes.
Right.
And I went to a college prep, like I went to a college prep junior high school and then high school, but even in the high school, it's a college prep, but SAT classes weren't mandatory.
Right.
So it's things as simple as that. Like, and it's like, you look at stuff like, you know, silly things like Saved by the Bell, and it's like they did a whole, like, these schools, like, other people are
Kiana said,
literally,
sorry, Robert. Kiana said not Thurgood, so I was wrong. Thurgood Marshall Academy didn't even do college prep. She went there, so they didn't even do college prep. So that takes it back down to two.
but it's like the SATs are a big thing for everybody else, but it's like, even that, and then, and then outside of the whole fact that standardized testing in itself is inherently racist, it's like,
Right.
we're not even given the classes to do well on said standardized test. Like,
And
you got to go out and fend for yourself, which is expensive, and a lot of people
yeah,
can't do it.
and even if
I
you
like
go
that
back a
you
little bit further, sorry,
go ahead.
if
Go
you
ahead.
go back a little bit further, think about the fact that for a long time, public colleges were so cheap and affordable, and I think maybe even free. And then Reagan changed that. And
Oh,
then what
don't even.
happened? A lot of black people couldn't go to school because they couldn't afford it because he changed it. It was like it was too accessible. So then it was
Yeah,
like, okay, now this thing is too accessible. So it's like everyone's getting this foot up, and if someone's getting left in the dust, and majority of the time when someone's getting left in the dust, it's because they're black And it's really what it comes down to. When people, like, it really is like when you get to a certain level of whether it be wealth or education, it's like it was like against all odds if you did not already grow up wealthy. So it definitely is, like I said, it's systemic. It's.
Yeah, I like that you brought up affirmative action, Robert, or Chico, excuse me, because it made me think about the new push for diversity and inclusivity, and for me, that just feels like a modern form of affirmative action, because it's
Agreed.
just placeholding. And I did a video saying that just representation matters, but what does the person who's representing you, like, how are they benefiting, like, the social cause? And you kind of brought this up earlier, Tati. Just because, I mean, certainly, just because we had black president, right? Well, like, what really changed and got better within the experience because of having a black president? And it feels like nothing. I want to ask, like, what tools, like, outside of the systemic limitations that have been placed on the black experience and African American experience, what additional tools do you feel are needed to like elevate the black experience? Um, I think, like, one thing was, like, it was unity, right? Like, like, what's a tool to bring back unity and, like, strength in numbers? Either of you feel?
Honestly, I think I think therapy or something along the lines of therapy or some sort of classes that would be a great tool because a lot of black people don't understand or don't understand but don't realize just how much negativity has been ingrained in us as a people and as a culture that we turn a blind eye to it. Something simple as a parent yelling how some parents talk to their kids. You know, like it's not uncommon for you to be on the street or on the train or something, see a kid acting out, and their parent flips out on them. Oh, you're acting stupid. You're acting this. Blah blah blah. That all goes back to how we were talked to when we were slaves, and that's how. So once we got free, oh, this is how we're supposed to be talked to. So when you have a kid, you yell at your kid and you demean your child. That kid grows up to have a kid. So we need, like, I went through therapy for a little over a year during the course of the pandemic, and I had a black therapist, great therapist, and he even pointed out things to me that I didn't even realize. Like, all of this goes back to outside of the whole systemic racism of the country. Like, this stuff has been ingrained in us and it's systemic in us. Like, even as, like, so that's why I said, like, therapy or like classes, something where people can just talk and then see a perspective that is coming from a person that looks like them, may have had the same upbringing as them, and then they realize, oh, it's not being a sellout to do this or think this or not yell at my kid or not litter. Like, it's just little tiny things that it's we don't realize. It's all little bits of negativity that help destroy our culture, destroy us as a people, and keep us in the position that we're in.
Yeah, generational trauma. Kiana said more trauma informed care in all settings, especially schools and healthcare services, which is true because we don't have the same sort of access. And generational trauma is a real thing because, we pass it down from generation to generation, and people trying, now are trying to break the cycle with gentle parenting and giving their kids more autonomy. And that's like a big thing I feel a lot of black parents have a hard time giving their kids is autonomy, where children don't even feel like they have the right to question anything, to have conversations or honest conversations with their parents because they're afraid to be shut down, and it's almost like you have to wait to adulthood before you can really sit down and have those conversations with people. And I think that it's like she said, like Kiana said, it's correct because you have to give your children space to be who they are. I feel like sometimes there's such a defined way of looking at blackness, and there shouldn't be. You should be able to be black and do all sorts of things, whether it's listen to rock music or paint or whatever. And I feel even a good example would be Will Smith. People question all the time how he raises his kids because they like Willow shaves her head and she has a septum ring and she experiments with
Right.
music. And the same thing with Jaden. It's almost just kind of like, oh, they're not real black people because they do this or like this. There's just one tiny scope of looking at blackness, and that's not just all it is. It's so many other things too. Um, but yeah, that's what.
Yeah, I feel like Robert brought this up in the last YouTube live, like the monolithic thinking, and that again kind of being ingrained as part of the generational history. We all behave because if you mess up, I get beat. And I'm not sure if either of you familiar with like Derby's dose, but there's just consequences for existing within blackness. The idea when you see someone black on TV. I mean, growing up, the awareness and like realizing, right, when someone black does something on TV, you're like, damn, like they made us look bad, right? I feel like a lot of us kind of grew up with that mentality, but the growth and the trauma healing, the therapy, the conversations, and the awareness of it allows you to kind of break free and be like, I don't like I talked about, don't call me brother. I don't know you like that, so like I'm not associating you and what you do with my life. But I understand the consequences, and I understand that there's this social awareness that puts that pressure on it. I'm just one person who doesn't do it, and I hope to be a better example for what blackness represents. Since you're on, Robert, I wanted to ask you, and we're kind of transition with this. I wanted to ask you about social responsibility. In the episode, Tatiana and I talked about social responsibility. We talked about integrity on the episode earlier today. Do you feel like you have a social responsibility to the groups you're a part of? What do you have a breaking point when it comes to integrity and swallowing your pride?
I I feel like I don't view it as a social responsibility as, like a black male or like as the groups I belong to. I just view it as, you know, a social responsibility to be a good person. Period. Like,
A
and
humanist.
in regards to like integrity, like integrity is a very I feel like it's a very slippery slope. Like it's a word in a concept that goes both ways. Like, integrity for a white person is viewed differently than integrity for a black person. For example, it's like, and to touch on like the episode of the podcast, um, you addressed that, it was his integrity, to finish the job and things like that. And to be like a good example as a black person, so to speak, for the most part. And, you know, but where was Gillespie's integrity? Like he was he in his mind and in his view, he had integrity because he's trying to do his job. Like, I don't need the help of a black person to do this. This person did it. Even though he was wrong the entire time, but he viewed it as, he probably that character viewed it that was his integrity. So integrity is it's kind of like a swing door, not a revolving door, but like a swing door, like a saloon door, where it's like it can go either way. And just because it goes either way, that doesn't mean it's right or that it's wrong. So that's why I feel like integrity is a very tricky thing. So like when it comes to me, my integrity is to respect myself and like respect those around me. And if the situation is not, I'm not getting respected, or I'm not being, or like, or respect isn't given or being taken, like if I'm trying to offer up respect to a colleague or a person um, in a superior position or whatever, and it's not being accepted, then in me, my integrity to be like, you know what, the hell with you. I'm moving on. Like, I'm
Right.
not gonna. You can't beat a dead horse. And some people, their mentalities are dead horses. I went to college. I was the only black kid on my campus for like 2 semesters. And, I've been called nigger by people just driving by in a car. And I went to school in the North. I went to school in Pennsylvania, which I affectionately call the South of the North. Um,
Right.
so, so, it's there were people driving around with Confederate flags on their pickup trucks and all that. And, I'm just walking down the street and they feel of, oh, I'm going to just lean out the window and call this guy a nigger because he's black. Where's their integrity? So, like, it's integrity is a very tricky thing and a very tricky concept because, you know, everyone feels that they're doing what's right, even if what they're doing is wrong. They
Mm-hmm.
feel that what they're doing is right. So that's why I feel like integrity is a very tricky concept because, you know, everyone believes in it for themselves. So that's why my personal, when it comes to me, integrity is really about self-respect and how much I'm going to take and what I'm not going to accept. Because if it's something that I'm not comfortable with or is not benefiting me or not fueling me, even though I'm trying to, do what's quote unquote right, that's not really, if I just head down and push through, that's not always, integrity on my part because it's just falling in line depending on the situation.
Right.
I get that. I mean, I feel like that's also, like you said, it's a revolving door. It's also perspective. Like I view Tibbs' integrity as integrity within himself, not integrity to do what he was told, or like you kind of use the language fall in line. For me, like the integrity should be founded on self and what I want to do. Like, do I want to honor this job? And in Tibbs' case, do I want to honor this job and do what I need to? But yeah, I do it. And he goes back and forth. Sometimes sometimes he's at the
Yeah,
train
because there were
station.
times he was like, "To hell with you, I'm out. Like, give me my
Yeah,
suitcase and take me to the train station."
right.
So,
But that's the thing
And
too I wanted to say about Gillespie. I think he did have integrity. His integrity was called into question the moment he accepted help from Tibbs. So his integrity was not, I don't want to have anything to do with this black guy. I don't care where he's coming from. But then when he realized he's this great detective from Philly, then he's like, all right, fine. But his integrity was called into question because that's not what he was used to. So it's like we said, it's a swinging door. It really just depends on the situation, on the person, and what they deemed to be like, self-respect, or even worth like, looking the other way.
right. All right. I always appreciate you jumping in, Chico. I'm gonna take you out, and then we're gonna wrap up.
appreciate you.
Thanks
Bye.
again, man. Yeah. Any final thoughts? In the heat of the night,
Yes.
1967 film.
1967 film starring Sidney Poitier. I say give it a watch. This definitely has this definitely has made me exactly. It definitely made me want to watch more Sidney Poitier movies. I'm really
Yeah.
excited about that. Yeah, I give it a I give it an 8 out of 10 because I don't really like cops.
Okay, that's fair.
But I'm gonna watch some more Sidney Poitier movies. I know that.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I definitely agree with your point in terms of again. It's like I'm happy we watched this film. I have glad we're expanding to older films. Um, yeah, I think it's important to give it a watch. I think all art from generations past are essential to remembering the history, the trauma of your group's experience, and for me, it kind of helps you reconnect to see, like, is this shit still going on now? And if it is,
Yeah.
finding a solution. Yeah, our next episode drops next Thursday, I believe it is January, June 30th. We're doing Jay-Z's The Black Album, courtesy of Tati.
I
Yeah,
love you,
that's
Sean
all I got.
Carter.
All right, thanks for rocking
That's
out.
all I got too.
Thank you, Kiana. Thank you, Chico, and thank you, Erica, for joining in. Peace.